Go.
My name is Kelly Martinick, and I am a senior in the Flex program. I've been in the program since freshman year, and we hear for 4 years all about, we go every year to these big boards, and you look at it and you just go, wow, that's a lot of work, and it is a lot of work, but I think, it was really important to pick a topic that was interesting to be able to write 17 pages about. And I picked to do my research paper on blogs and websites that promote self-harm and eating disorders. And today I'm going to talk specifically about the online presence of pro-eating disorder blogs, specifically pro-anorexia or pro-ANA and pro-MIA for pro-bulimia. Because when I was going through and researching for my paper, it was a lot easier to find authoritative scholarly sources about pro-eating disorder blogs than it was about pro-self-harm blogs. And so I think I just have a better understanding of that, and it's easier to talk about. So the main point that I'm making today is that pro-eating disorder blogs, commonly called pro-ANA for pro-anorexia or pro-MIA for pro-bulimia, encourage destructive behaviors by presenting eating disorders as glamorous or trendy. And I'd also like to talk a little bit about how I picked this topic. So I was at a summer residential journalism program at Northwestern University last summer, and they asked us to pick a trend to write a 6-page, 1,500-word trend story on. And the specific directions were it has to be something new enough that everyone doesn't already know about it, but old enough that it really is a trend. And I picked Fitspiration, which are blogs and websites that promote fitness, but in my research for that, and I got to talk to a lot of really cool people who I'll talk about later in this presentation, I realized that some of those blogs in promoting fitness go too far and promote eating disorders. But these that I'm going to talk about today are websites and blogs with the specific intention of promoting eating disorders. So the biggest thing that is important about this topic is that in the age of social media, we need to be hyper aware of the way that we talk about and handle eating disorders. So the first thing I want to show you is a video, and it's one of the less graphic ones because some of the videos on this topic are just too disturbing to show. But this is very factual, it's very informational, but some of the images, trigger warning, some of the images are a little bit graphic, so.
To develop anorexia. India Edmonds, now 17, said that at the age of 14 she developed anorexia.
And this should actually work. I don't really know why it's not working. Oh, my computer
She began
froze.
spending a lot of time combing through the internet and photo sites such as Instagram and Pinterest to find inspiration photos. Edmonds became obsessed with her thigh gap and often took a dozen selfies a day. Inspiration photos are often selfies taken by pro-anorexia or pro-ANA for short.
Computer's just slow.
Share tips on how to lose weight, purge, and starve themselves into being ever thinner. Edmonds was a healthy 136 pounds, but when she was finally hospitalized for her eating disorder 6 months later, she barely weighed 84 pounds. During the first 3 months of her 7-month hospital stay, Edmonds was force-fed through eat, while doctors and family tried to convince the teenager that she had to eat or she'd die. Edmonds said that the pro-ANA blogs and photo sites helped her destroy her self-respect and her life. One of the common set of rules found on many sites are the 10 thin commandments. Thin commandments. 1. If you aren't thin, you aren't attractive. 2. Being thin is more important than being healthy. 3. You must buy clothes, style your hair, take laxatives, starve yourself, do anything to make yourself look thinner. 4. Thou shalt not eat without feeling guilty. 5. Thou shalt not eat fattening food without punishing oneself afterwards. 6. Thou shalt count calories and restrict intake accordingly. 7. What the scale says is the most important thing. 8. Losing weight is good. Gaining weight is bad. 9. You can never be too thin. 10. Being thin and not eating are signs of true willpower and success. Edmonds is now well into the road to recovery and weighs a healthier 110 pounds. Instagram announced a ban on users who promoted anorexia or other eating disorders. Some countries, such as Italy, have even considered criminalizing pro-ANA sites and writers. And finally,
Okay, so that was good. That video had a lot of good information in it, and talked about one girl's specific story about struggling with an eating disorder and being on these blogs. I think that one thing that's really important to address too is that going on the internet isn't going to give you anorexia. You're not going to just learn how to be an anorexic. It's obviously a mental disorder, but the problem is that in people who are susceptible to these things, it makes it a whole lot worse. So, according to the National Association of Anorexia Nervosa and Associated Disorders, which is ANAD, the characteristics of pro-eating disorder sites are glamorizing images of very thin women, demonizing food and fat, promoting thinness at any cost, and boasting exclusivity. Some of the other characteristics of pro-eating disorder sites, some of their themes are shame, telling you that if you weigh too much or you eat too much that you should feel guilty and you're not good enough. Perfection and success, that you have to be perfect and anything less than perfect isn't good enough. And self-control, that you should feel superior if you can restrict calories to an unhealthy anorexic point. Like the video said, one of the 10 thin commandments was that restricting calories and not eating was a sign of supreme willpower. So that is the biggest thing that's wrong with these blogs and why these messages are harmful, is because they paint unhealthy calorie restriction, or in the case of bulimia, purging through extreme exercise or vomiting, as something that indicates that you have some self-control that everyone else doesn't have, as opposed to being symptoms of a disease. The scariest thing too, one study that I found talked about how it really showed how these sites can affect anyone. And like I said, they're not like going on the internet isn't going to give you an eating disorder. But in one study, they asked college-aged women with no history of eating disorders to go on these sites and just peruse for a little bit. And afterward, 48% said the sites made them feel dissatisfied with their bodies, and 84% of them decreased their calorie intake over the next week, and that was by an average of almost 3,000 calories during that week. So now I want to talk a little bit about how these sites came into being, because obviously the internet is relatively new, obviously in comparison with, eating disorders. And one of the things that I found really sad but interesting in my research was that tip sharing among anorexics in inpatient clinics, which is where they would be sent to recover and put weight back on, was already happening. So they would share tips to lose weight, and they would have competitions to have the lowest weight in their ward, all in the place where they were supposed to be recovering. So obviously this problem existed without any help, but then the internet comes along and provides a platform to amplify it. So in the late 1990s, pro-ana sites started to be profiled on Oprah. And in the next year, the rate of appearance of these sites increased by 470%. In 2001, the mainstream media really started to cover these sites, and they found out that Yahoo, which was one of the main web hosts for sites, was hosting the very most of any of these websites. And they shut down 115 of them in 5 days in July of 2001. But the result of that was just that pro-anorexia sites moved underground, essentially to the basement of the internet, and were then hosted by private web portals because they were being kicked off of the big ones. So from 2000 to 2009, they're underground. And an interesting, I don't know, correlation, causation, but the statistic was that the number of people hospitalized for eating disorders between 2000 and 2009 increased by 24%. And then in 2008, there was a BBC News report that estimated that there were over 500 pro-eating disorder sites on the internet. And that just blew my mind when I read that because it seems like such a small number. And so 2008 is another milestone, though, because in 2006 and 2007, Twitter and Tumblr were launched. And so in 2008, as you can imagine, social media is finally getting a little popular. And for these sites that had survived in private web portals and being kicked off of public ones, social media provided the perfect place to gain more followers and thrive. And today, according to a study, there are an estimated 200,000 Tumblr blogs that use language related to self-harm and eating disorders. And that's just on Tumblr. Like the video said, Instagram has a ban on them, and, you know, Pinterest and Tumblr and Twitter will all issue a trigger warning. So if you go on and you just go right now and you search pro-anorexia, you get a little thing that pops up and it says, do you need help? Eating disorders are not a lifestyle choice, they're a disease, giving you numbers and websites for counseling, but you can just close it, and you can just hit close and you can browse through them. You can browse through all of the search results. And I know because I have spent more time than I would like to have on pro-eating disorder blogs recently. So, if we can't censor them, the next natural question for me was, why don't we just, or if we can't, I don't know, if they're just providing these trigger warnings, the thing that it made me think was, why can't we just take them down? So there are three main reasons that these websites won't just go away. The first is that they're harder to identify than you would think. Like you can imagine, there are like 8 million Tumblr blogs. So it's not like in 2008 when we could go, wow, there are 500 of these. You have to sift through 8 million pages just on Tumblr. And according to the study that estimated that there are 200,000 Tumblr blogs used eating disorder related language, they said that if they'd tracked tags that were purposely misspelled, like spelling thin with a Y or saying loose weight instead of lose weight, that there would have been the number would have been so much higher than 200,000 for the estimate of the number of these blogs. So they're hard to identify, and the second reason is site traffic. Michael Hayward, who is the co-founder of the app Whisper, said that social media sites are not willing to do anything that even remotely alienates a small amount of their audience or that's going to affect their daily numbers. So to that end, it's kind of a bottom line thing. So they're hard to identify, it'll affect site traffic, and the really big one is the First Amendment. Americans are super reluctant to do anything that they think might even remotely infringe on someone's First Amendment right to freedom of speech. In 2006, Australia criminalized pro-suicide websites, and there was a whole debate over whether or not this infringed upon their citizens' rights to free speech. But like I mentioned a little bit earlier, over the summer when I was doing my story on Fitspiration blogs, I got to talk to Dr. Mary Sanders and Dr. Allison Darcy, who are both professors at Stanford School of Medicine, specifically within their Department of Psychiatry's Eating Disorder Department. And when I was asking Allison Darcy about the Fitspo blogs, she said that she didn't think there was any case for censoring them because there wasn't enough research about how they affected people, and that some of them were genuinely promoting health. But there was a really, really good quote from my interview with her that I want to share with you because I think it makes the exact case that I am trying to make. And it's that the pro-anorexia sites are different because they are very intentionally encouraging behaviors that end in death. So I just thought that was a really powerful quote. So to tie this all back to my thesis was, while the internet is a powerful tool, pro-eating disorder websites have used it to promote and encourage destructive behaviors. By looking at the impact and the history of these sites, experts can not only halt this trend, they can also use the internet as a means of reaching young people at risk for self-harm and eating disorders. So the big part of that thesis was to use this somehow as a positive. And some of the possible solutions that I think are, the biggest one is to change the way that we talk about eating disorders. Restricting calories shouldn't be looked at as a feat of superhuman self-control, and they shouldn't be looked at as glamorous. And one quote from the Social Issues Resources Center that I found in my research was, it is society's association of fat with laziness and thinness with strength and morality that encourages pro-eating disorder sites illusions of superiority and exclusivity within their follower base. So that's a society of the whole thing. The second is that in the same, or along the same lines of changing the way we talk about eating disorders, the best analogy is how reporters won't report the grisly details of violent murders because they don't want to encourage copycats. In the same way, and it's the only thing I really didn't like about the video that I showed earlier, was that we should avoid detailed accounts of the weights and habits of anorexics, because if you're really sick and you really have that disorder, hearing things like, at her worst she weighed 80 pounds, or she only ate 300 calories a day, give sick anorexics numbers to use as goals and encouragement. A change in vocabulary won't stop pro-anorexia sites from saying whatever they want and encouraging whatever behaviors they want, but they've shown that most of the things on these sites are pictures from model portfolios or magazines, and so they're things that are coming from the mainstream society. So if we change the way the media talks about thinness and food and body image, it'll go a long way, and it'll stop adding fuel to their fire. The second thing is to teach people to associate health with balance and not with thinness. And this is a quote from Mary Sanders, who's the other PhD at Stanford that I spoke to. She said that true health is about balance. What I tend to see on a lot of these blogs is promoting extremes, not balance. Anytime anybody pushes themselves to extremes, it'll eventually backfire. And she went on to talk there about how your metabolism will slow down and you can actually gain weight from developing an eating disorder at first. And the last solution is to use the internet to reach out to sufferers who might be hiding their disorder from their friends and family, but are reaching out to people on the internet. So the problem with that is the anonymity of the internet, but if we could find a way to find these people, then maybe it would be easier to help them. So the last thing I want to talk about is my community outreach. Right now, I am still in the works. I am planning on going to Pierce Elementary School to talk with one of their all-girls clubs about body positivity. Obviously, I'm not going to talk to third graders about eating disorders, but I think just a general sense of body positivity and loving yourself is just as important as knowing not to starve yourself, and it plays a big part anyway. You know, I hope that maybe if you start young, kids won't, their first instinct when they're suffering from something like this won't be to turn to the internet to stay in their disease. It'll be to go and try to seek help. So yeah, that's my outreach, and that's a picture of my outreach, and that is my presentation. So if you guys have any questions, I can answer them now.
1857.